The sky was a canvas of fire and steel as the alien ships broke through the atmosphere. Their hulls shimmered with a metallic iridescence, smooth and unblemished, as though forged from a single unbroken piece of metal. Cities beneath them erupted into panic, but the Zephyrians, tall, sinewy beings with a predatory grace, made no immediate move. Instead, their flagship lowered into the Nevada desert, its shadow swallowing miles of barren earth, and there they waited. Captain John Harker stood among the assembled representatives of Earth's most powerful nations, his face carved with the lines of a man who had seen too much war to be surprised by yet another one. The briefing had been quick and cold. First contact, an ultimatum likely to follow. Beside him, Sergeant Miguel Mick Ramirez adjusted his gear with casual indifference, his grin irreverent as ever. $10 says they talk a big game and flinch when the real shooting starts, he whispered. Save your money, Mick, Harker replied without looking. You'll need it to buy your next rank. Lieutenant Caleb Doc Warren stood stiffly at attention, scanning the alien figures as they emerged. His sharp blue eyes were unreadable, though Harker knew his mind was cataloging every detail. Their gait, their posture, the faint hum of energy surrounding their armor. Private First Class Eric Buzz Carson, the youngest of the group, fidgeted nervously, his rifle clutched too tightly. Harker caught his eye and gave a single, rounding nod. The Zephyrian delegation strode forward, their leader towering over even the tallest human. His features were angular and cold, his skin a pale silver that reflected the desert sun. I am Archon Velrath of the Zephyrian Dominion, he announced, his voice resonant and unsettlingly melodic. We come not as friends, but as rulers. Your species has been deemed inadequate for coexistence. Harker stepped forward, his boots crunching on the sand. We don't take kindly to being judged by strangers, he said evenly, his tone neither hostile nor deferential. Velrath's expression twisted into something resembling amusement. Primitive words from a primitive creature. You must understand, Captain, this is not a negotiation. Humanity will submit to the Dominion, relinquishing its autonomy, or face annihilation. You have 72 hours to decide. Behind Harker, Carson bristled. You can't just... Stand down, Private, Harker said sharply, silencing him. But the damage was done. Velrath's gaze shifted to Carson, and his smile grew colder. A child in your military. How quaint, he said. Turning back to Harker, he gestured to the horizon, where a demonstration of Zephyrian power awaited. With a flick of his wrist, a slender device projected a beam of light toward an uninhabited mountain range. The resulting explosion was silent but devastating, a flash of energy that reduced the peaks to molten slag. Ramirez let out a low whistle. Well, that's one way to settle a zoning dispute. Velrath ignored him. Your weapons are crude, your tactics archaic, he said, addressing the assembled leaders as if they were an audience at a lecture. This is your one chance to preserve what little of your species we deem worth saving. Do not waste it. The delegation turned and strode back to their ship, leaving the humans standing in stunned silence. The Zephyrian vessel ascended with a soundless grace, disappearing into the sky as quickly as it had arrived. Harker exhaled, his jaw tight. We need options, he said, turning to the others. Ramirez shrugged. We've got plenty of bullets. Just need to figure out where to aim, M. Did you see their tech? Carson blurted, his voice higher than he intended. That wasn't a bomb. That was... Advanced energy manipulation, Doc interrupted, his tone clinical. And they know we can't match it. Harker nodded, his mind already working. Then we find another way. Every system has a weak point. We just need to figure out what theirs is. The return to base was grim. News of the ultimatum had spread quickly, and the air was heavy with fear. The Zephyrians' broadcast had been global, their message unambiguous. Across the world, governments scrambled for solutions, but most military analysts agreed on one point. Earth's most advanced weaponry would be useless against the alien shields. In the war room, Harker's team gathered around a map of Earth overlaid with Zephyrian positions. They've established footholds near major population centers, Doc observed. Classic psychological warfare. Makes it easier to break morale. We're not broken yet, Ramirez said, pulling out a pack of gum and offering it to Carson, who declined with a shake of his head. They think they're untouchable, but that kind of arrogance, it's a liability. Harker tapped the table, silencing the conversation. We're running out of time. Command wants every unit prepared for a last-ditch defense, but I'm not interested in going down swinging. If we're going to fight, we fight to win. The room fell silent as they absorbed his words. Harker turned to Ramirez. Dig through the archives. Find anything pre-electronic, old guns, artillery, anything that doesn't rely on modern tech. If it can put a hole in something, I want to know about it. You got it, Cap, Ramirez said, already scribbling notes. Doc, I need you to focus on their biology. Anything you can figure out about their physiology might give us an edge. Understood, Doc replied, his voice steady. Carson, Harker said, and the young soldier snapped to attention. Stick close to Ramirez. Learn everything you can about operating the equipment we dig up. Yes, sir, Carson said, his voice firm despite the nervous tremor beneath it. Harker took a deep breath and looked at the map again. The odds were impossible, but if the Zifferans thought humanity would simply roll over, they were in for a rude awakening. We've got 72 hours, he said, his voice low but resolute. Let's show them what primitive really looks like. The team dispersed, each man carrying the weight of Earth's survival on his shoulders. Outside, the night sky was calm, but the storm was coming. In the days that followed the alien ultimatum, the world fractured into a chaotic dance of fear, preparation, and disbelief. Governments that once quarreled over petty borders now found themselves united by a common threat: extinction. The Zifferans, having demonstrated their dominance with ruthless precision, left humanity no choice but to adapt or die. In the sterile war room beneath the towering mountain base, Captain John Harker leaned over a map, his fingers tracing lines of ancient battlefields and modern cities. The world had barely grasped the enormity of the situation, but his team already had their work cut out for them. Any luck with those files, Ramirez? Harker's voice was rough, a stark contrast to the sterile air of the command center. Sergeant Miguel, Mick Ramirez grinned up from a stack of old military archives, the corners of his mouth twitching with humor despite the looming crisis. You're not going to believe this, Cap, he said, holding up a battered folder marked World War II-era weapons and tactics. This one's ancient, but it could work. The old Browning M2 heavy machine gun. Heavy machine gun. Lieutenant Caleb, Doc, Warren's brow furrowed. We're going to fight those things with that. We've got to start somewhere, Doc, Ramirez replied. His voice was full of the quiet confidence that had earned him his reputation. Zifferans are shielded against plasma weapons, but this old relic might do the trick. Doc's fingers drummed against the table, his mind whirring. You're right. It's kinetic energy, so it could bypass their defenses. We're talking about something designed for trench warfare, not intergalactic invaders. Harker stood still, absorbing the words. The Zifferans had proven invulnerable to anything humanity had thrown at them thus far. But a heavy machine gun? The idea felt like a fragile thread. Yet it was the only lifeline they had. Let's do it. We're going to need more than one. Private First Class Eric Buzz Carson, who had been silent up until now, shifted nervously from foot to foot. You really think this'll work, Captain? He asked, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and fear. Harker glanced at him. Carson was young, too young for the war they were about to fight, but his eyes were sharp, and his instincts had already proven valuable in the field. I don't know, Buzz, Harker admitted, but if there's one thing I know, it's that our strength isn't in our weapons. It's in how we use them. The decision was made quickly, but the logistics were far from simple. Ramirez set to work in the lab, stripping down the M2 Browning, a relic of the Second World War, re-engineering it with new ammunition, and adding modifications that would make it far more lethal. The gun's old steel frame hummed with potential, its mechanism sluggish at first but slowly coming to life under Ramirez's expert touch. Doc, on the other hand, pored over the data from previous skirmishes, compiling everything he could about Zifferan biology. Their shields were an enigma, but their bodies weren't invincible. There had to be a weakness somewhere. The hours were long, the pressure mounting. The Zifferans hadn't moved yet, but their ominous silence weighed heavily on the resistance. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come to annihilate. But humanity, as ever, refused to bend. Ramirez tossed the final schematic onto the table. "Got it," he said, his eyes alight with the thrill of discovery. "I've modified the ammo with a heavier core, tungsten alloy. It'll pierce through their shields long enough to make a dent. It's not pretty, but it's gonna hit hard." Doc studied the plans for a moment before nodding. "It might just work. You've got to hit them at the right angle, though. Their shields are directional." Yeah, I know," Ramirez said with a smirk. "I'm not a rookie." Despite his confidence, there was a tension in his shoulders that didn't go unnoticed. Harker met his gaze. "We all have our roles to play in this," Harker said quietly. "But in the end, it's the team that counts. Stick to the plan, and we'll get through this." Carson, always eager to prove himself, took the first chance he had to ask. "What's the plan, Cap? How are we going to use this?" Harker turned to face him. "We hit them fast and hard. A surgical strike. We take out one of their forward command posts. Show them they're not invincible. We don't need to win the war in one day, but we need to make them think twice." The mission was a risk, a desperate gamble, but they had no choice. The countdown was already ticking toward the Zifferin deadline. 72 hours to surrender, or face the wrath of an enemy unlike any Earth had ever known. As the team prepared to move out, the weight of the world pressed down on them. They were not soldiers of a nation anymore. They were the last hope for a species. Harker gave each man a firm nod, his voice steady. "This is it, gentlemen. You've trained your whole lives for moments like this. Let's make sure they remember the name Earth." The machines hummed to life, and the team moved into position, their heavy gear clanking as they made their way toward the enemy lines. The vast desert stretched out before them, an empty expanse that had never felt so suffocating. Their mission was simple: infiltrate, disable the Zifferin forward outpost, and escape without detection. But nothing about this mission would be simple. The enemy had the advantage of technology, numbers, and firepower, but humanity had something the Zifferins couldn't account for: ingenuity, determination, and the unyielding will to survive. The desert night was cold, the stars sharp against the ink-black sky. But beneath the surface, the ground was heating up, and the team could feel it. The weight of their task, the impossible odds, and the crushing knowledge that they were humanity's last line of defense, all swirled together in a perfect storm of tension. "Steady," Harker muttered, his voice barely a whisper as they neared the enemy perimeter. The flicker of distant lights from Zifferin patrols painted their figures in sharp relief. The Browning machine gun, strapped tightly to Ramirez's back, was a hulking presence, a symbol of humanity's desperation. The team split up, moving like shadows through the desert, and when the moment came, Ramirez unleashed hell. The roar of the heavy machine gun shattered the night, the rounds tearing through the Zifferin defenses with a deafening crack. It was raw, brutal, and clumsy, but it was enough. The shields, once thought impenetrable, buckled under the weight of sustained fire. And as the first Zifferin soldier fell, a spark of hope flickered in the hearts of Harker and his team. They were still fighting, and they weren't going to stop until the job was done. The resistance had grown, slowly but steadily, fed by each small victory, each breakthrough in human ingenuity. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the Zifferins take notice. The heavy machine guns, modified old artillery, even improvised explosives, each weapon, each tactic, all pieces of a desperate puzzle. Humanity wasn't lying down. It was fighting back. The days after their ambush were a blur. Ramirez's Browning had torn through the Zifferin lines, but the retaliation came swiftly. Earth's defenders, scrappy, resourceful, but ill-prepared for a war against an enemy so far superior, had to stay mobile, always one step ahead of the oncoming storm. The Zifferins were methodical, relentless in their pursuit, and they were learning from every skirmish. Humanity's old weapons were efficient, but they could only do so much against enemies who had already evolved beyond anything humans could comprehend. Harker, Ramirez, Doc, and Carson, along with the rest of their unit, had fought their way across continents, moving in and out of crumbled cities and war-torn landscapes, always in hiding, always on the edge of defeat. But they couldn't retreat any longer. Earth's final battle loomed large. The Zephyrin fleet hung in orbit, like a sword ready to fall. As the Resistance's small victories mounted, so did their risks. The Zephyrins had advanced their strategy, shifting from simple assaults to targeting humanity's critical infrastructure, cutting off supplies, and crippling the remaining defense networks. It was only a matter of time before their technological might crush the last pockets of resistance. Harker knew it. Ramirez knew it. Doc knew it. But they refused to let it break them. The mission was simple, but deadly. Take out the Zephyrin command ship. It was the linchpin of their operations, the source of their communications, the heart of their military superiority. Without it, the Zephyrins would have to rely on their smaller, scattered forces. And that, Harker believed, would be their only chance. The strategy was clear. Infiltrate the Zephyrin main base, slip past their defenses, and plant explosives in the heart of the ship's core. The rest of the world was relying on them to make the impossible happen. "We're not going to get another shot at this," Harker said, his voice steady as they gathered in the darkened war room. His hands were tense on the table, his mind already calculating the odds. "We get in, hit the ship, and get out. No time to waste. This could turn the tide. Or it could be our graves." Doc nodded, his stoic demeanor hiding the weight of the mission. "If we do this, we need to be sure. We can't afford a single mistake." Carson shifted, his hands gripping the straps of his gear. "You don't have to worry about me, Captain. I'm ready." Harker locked eyes with him. Carson was eager, but it wasn't the kind of eagerness that came from youthful enthusiasm. This was a different fire, one born from fear, sure, but also from a determination to prove himself. Harker knew that, and it gave him hope. Ramirez smirked, tightening his gloves. "As long as there's a Browning involved, I'm game." His gaze flicked to the heavy machine gun slung over his shoulder, its bulk a comforting weight. There was something in the way Ramirez carried it that made it clear. They were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for victory. The plan went into motion quickly. The team moved in under the cover of darkness, using old military camouflaging techniques to blend with the environment. They navigated through the desolate landscapes, their every step cautious, measured. The closer they got to the Zephyrin base, the more the gravity of their mission settled on their shoulders. There would be no turning back once they entered. As they neared the base, the sounds of distant battles echoed across the horizon. Humanity's scattered resistance forces were still holding out, but they could feel it in the air. The Zephyrins were closing in. The humans had one shot at this, and if they failed, it would be the end of everything. Inside the base, the sounds of alien technology hummed, the eerie glow of energy shields illuminating the dark hallways. The Zephyrin soldiers were everywhere, their advanced armor blending with the walls, their movements silent and deliberate. Harker motioned for the team to stay low, slipping past patrols and scanning every corner for potential threats. "Almost there," Harker whispered, his voice sharp as they approached the core of the Zephyrin ship. Doc was first to enter, his medical kit already prepped in case they needed to fight their way through. He looked back at the others, his face grim. "This is it." The interior of the ship was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Sleek metallic walls, strange glyphs etched into the surfaces, and a pervasive hum that seemed to vibrate through their bones. The Zephyrins didn't just conquer planets. They made them theirs, turning every corner of the ship into a reflection of their own alien world. "Stay focused," Harker muttered, motioning for Ramirez to take point. The machine gun felt like a weighty burden now, more so than it had ever been before. With each step, it became clearer. One misstep, and it was all over. They made their way to the command center, the heart of the beast, the core where the Zephyrins controlled everything, the place where their shields, their firepower, and their dominance originated. "Ready?" Harker asked, his voice low. Ramirez nodded, his fingers brushing over the heavy machine gun, checking the ammo one last time. "Let's make this count." Doc stepped forward and activated the explosives, setting the countdown. They had 10 minutes. As the seconds ticked away, the hum of the ship grew louder, and the sound of Zephyrin footsteps echoed through the halls. They were on high alert now, but it didn't matter. The countdown was irreversible. "You know what to do," Harker said. His voice was steady, but there was a sense of finality to it. This was the moment where all their work, all their losses, and all their sacrifices came to a head. They turned and raced out, the machine gun roaring to life as Ramirez laid down suppressive fire, cutting through the approaching Zifferan soldiers with the raw, unrelenting force of their old weapon. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. The ship groaned under the strain as the explosives triggered. And just like that, the Zifferan command ship, along with their technological superiority, began to fall apart. Harker's voice was sharp, commanding. "Get to the extraction point. Now." The ship was crumbling around them, but they were alive. And for the first time since this war began, it felt like the tide had finally begun to turn.